Hey, this is Jason Isbell, and you're listening to the LSQ podcast.
It's true, you are listening to the LSQ podcast, and I appreciate it. I'm Jenny LSQ. Welcome to episode 97. It was such a pleasure talking to Jason Isbell for the interview in this episode, which coincides with Isbell and the 400 unit doing what has become a fall tradition. They're playing a series of shows at Nashville's legendary Ryman Auditorium. They also have other U.S. dates in early 2024. You can get info and tickets at jasonisbell.com. While you're there, maybe get a copy of the deluxe edition of Southeastern. It just came out for that excellent album's 10th anniversary. And also, if you weren't aware of it, look into their Weathervanes from earlier this year. Plus, this week you can see Isbell in the new Scorsese film, Killers of the Flower Moon. So look for him therein. And we're talking about Pop-Tarts when the interview started. I don't remember how we got there. I think Jen, Jason's publicist, had a memory of Pop-Tarts from our friendship, and it set us off on one. So here we go. I mean, sometimes you just got to go raw with the Pop-Tart if circumstances call for it, you know?
At a certain age, you stop heating up the Pop-Tarts.
Yeah, because you're just like, who am I kidding?
Yeah.
Making this like it's a self-care when really it's let's just ignore it and pretend it never happened.
You don't want to put too much, like the longer it takes for you to prepare the Pop-Tart, the more likely somebody's going to see you preparing the Pop-Tart. Okay, here we go. How are you?
I'm good. Great to meet you. Thanks for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, you too.
I don't know how much you were told about the sort of theme of this show, but it's the way back. It's the what you were into as a kid and all of the things that you were kind of soaking in your environment that first got you feeling creative, and how you have built on those things, but really kind of focusing on that early period of time. And so I want to start with, what do you remember about the first feelings of creativity that ever emerged from you? How old would you have been when some urge to create sparkled?
Isn't that inherent? Doesn't that happen from the beginning for kids? Don't we have to be taught not to create? I think the spark is just their existence when we're little kids, and then somebody sort of beats it out of you, or they don't, But the first time I saw other people being creative would have been family, because my granddad, my dad's dad, was a Pentecostal preacher, not by trade. Like, I don't think he earned enough money preaching to support his family. So he also painted houses, did some mild construction work, but he played music, and all of his brothers and sisters played music, and my uncles all played, my grandmother sang. And I think that was probably the first I saw of what we would typically call creativity. But I don't know. I think the more time I spend around little kids, the more I see that is just a default setting. It's kind of like trust and respect. It's like kids just sort of have it, and if we don't beat it out of them, they keep it.
Truly, but also I've noticed that, and maybe it's just because maybe it's a confirmation bias, because everybody I talk to is somebody who's a professional artist, to say that maybe it's the next level of that feeling, or the sort of like becoming a bit fixated on it in a way that maybe other people, it just kind of flows, or it flows away from them farther. That people who end up being creative professionally in their adulthoods, that there's that moment where it's solidifying, that something that they're discovering that they love, that is the feeling that carries them forward, like until now. Like,
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing. Like, when did you realize, like, no, this is really important to me? It's not just the thing my family does around me.
I was the only child around in my family. Like, I was my parents' only child. I was, my uncle didn't have any kids. My mom's family, they all had kids that were much younger than me. So until I was in my teens, there were no cousins. There was nobody, just me and a bunch of adults, And I was a little OCD. I think that probably helped. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of options. I think that helped a whole lot. I enjoyed playing instruments because I could control them, you know, and that was about it as far as me being in control of anything. So I just liked it enough to want to do it all the time. I don't think I've ever practiced. I still don't feel like in the traditional sense of the term practice. I don't think I've ever done it. Between interviews today, I got the guitar out and played because I didn't have anything to do for that, period of time. And I think talent, obviously some people have natural predispositions toward music or math or reading or whatever, but the majority of talent for me, I think, is just being lucky enough to want to do something all the time. It's just love. Like everything else good, it's just love at its root. And the way creative pursuits were presented to me, it wasn't directly entangled with anything commercial. It was something that people did because it made them feel better and because they could control the machines. And as I got older, I realized that was probably a big part of why my grandfather played music and his siblings played music, was because they could control that part of their life and they could choose which songs they wanted to sing and which songs they wanted to play. And they'd grown up very poor, sharecroppers, and they didn't have control over much of anything else. I think that combination of lack of options and just a genuine love for the way the arts were presented to me from the beginning, I think culminated in my identifying with it so closely. And then something sort of made me a fool. Something in there somewhere told me to actually pursue this to the ends of the earth if I had to. That's the part that I don't quite understand. I don't know what about me made me never stop and go, okay, I got to get my act together. Probably success fairly early on helped a whole lot with that, but I don't know what got me through those, last 1,000 miles in the van. Something did. Probably the encouragement that I got in those first few years. I had a good foundation of worth as it related to my creative life. But the first thing I remember hearing musically was my grandfather playing the guitar, the banjo, or the fiddle, or the mandolin, and singing gospel songs, but also singing hillbilly songs, mountain songs, and bluegrass and blues music. And all of these things were the same. They all sounded the same when he sang them. They all dealt with the same topics. But when I was a kid, I heard all those things at once in one big pile. And music was presented to me as something that was directly tied with family and security and safety and control. And so it was very highly regarded because of that.
And you played with the sort of family band as a regular practice. Is that correct?
We all just sat around and played music all the time. That's just what we did when people weren't working or going to school. We just sat around and played music. So about once a week, usually Sunday night, my grandmother would have everybody over to her house, and this would be like extended family, great aunts and cousins and distant cousins and family friends and stuff. And she would make some food, and everybody would just sit in the living room and play music or go out on the porch if the weather was good. And that's what we did, mostly gospel songs, but also some, Great Speckled Bird and Under the Double Eagle, and, and then some comical stuff. My grandfather liked String Bean and Grandpa Jones and Little Jimmy Dickens and all the funny Opry stars.
And so in the mix there, did you start to gravitate toward any of the kind of commercial music you were also just hearing as a kid, during adolescence or something?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I remember, the 80s, the pop music of the 80s hit me because pop music hits kids, directly. And now I look back on it and I think, how lucky was I, because like Squeeze was on the radio, and Prince, and Blondie, and the Bangles, and the Go-Go's, and, Crowded House, and this kind of stuff was happening on mainstream radio, and we didn't have any other type of radio there. We had big commercial stations, and that was that. Everything else was sermons and talk radio and stuff. And so the only music that I knew of outside of the personal sort of family music was big hits, huge popular songs, And then I liked electric guitar early on. My dad's brother played the electric guitar. My mom's brother did too. And so I gravitated towards that and I liked the volume of it. And a lot of the stuff that my grandfather had played for me had led me to the blues, which led me back out to, Hendrix and Eric Clapton and all these like 60s British guitar players and stuff. So I was taking all that in. Then when Pearl Jam happened, that was huge because I was already, dressing like those guys and playing a Strat with a wah-wah pedal. And, so that was a huge moment because all of a sudden everybody at school was dressing like I was already, and they were listening to a record that had a bunch of loud guitar solos on it. And that was a really big moment for me when 10 came out. I think I was like 13 or something, and it was a huge deal.
By that time, you could shred by then.
Yeah, it was quick, it was quick for me. Like I started 7 or 8 years old and just immediately I would do my homework as fast as I could and then just play the guitar until somebody made me stop and go to bed. So it happened super quickly.
But there were, because I read that you started on mandolin because it's a little bit smaller, but you could play the other instrument. You could play piano, right? Well, how many other instruments were you able to play at that time, but still guitar was the one that won out?
Well, they all made sense, I don't know, like the able to play thing. Like I could sit down and play something, and if you're not a musician, you would think, oh, he can play the piano, he can play the banjo, or he can play the dobro or whatever. But they're all classes of instruments. And if you can play stringed instruments, you can play stringed instruments. If you can play woodwinds, you can play woodwinds. I never could play woodwinds. The brass I could do because when I was in school, I started playing trumpet and French horn. I wanted to be in the high school band because that's where all the music was, and I talked my parents into letting me do that, and so like I learned how to play horns, but I can't play woodwinds and I can't really play bowed strings. I can bow a guitar like Jimmy Page, but not I can't play the fiddle, and certainly not in my house. I can't play the fiddle.
Right, but I mean, you potentially could have chosen those instruments to become obsessed with in the way that you did guitar. They were all like you had the beginnings of all of them, but the guitar sucked you in.
Yeah, that's what the guitar does. It's the guitar. It's the greatest instrument of all time. It's the most portable instrument you can make full chords and fill a room with. You can't take a piano to a party and you can't accompany somebody on a flute. The guitar is the perfect instrument. And then the electric guitar, one thing that I really liked about that is when you get to the end of what you know how to do, you can just make noise. And so when I was teaching guitar, when I was in my 20s, I would tell my students, get an electric guitar first. Everybody says get an acoustic guitar because it'll build up your calluses or whatever, but that's nonsense. What you want is somebody to play as much as possible. So if you get an electric guitar and a couple of pedals, then you run out of things you can do. You can just turn knobs and push buttons and make noise for hours. And that's what I would do. I had like a delay pedal and that was it. I would just sit on the floor and turn the knobs and listen to the sounds.
I'm intrigued that you mentioned in your 20s you did some teaching because, I mean, also in your 20s you were in Drive-By Truckers. So was there some overlap of where you were doing both things, or yeah, how many students did you have? I'd love to hear a little more about that.
I had a few. I had to quit when I joined that band. So 2021, I taught at the what's that little town called? It's right outside of Memphis. Bartlett, the Bartlett Community Center in Bartlett, Tennessee, and I would teach 2 or 3 days a week, and I started when I was in college there doing that, and then I went back through the summer and taught some. But I had one student that was like a 6-year-old girl, a 7-year-old girl, but she was really small and she was terrified. She was so scared of me, and I couldn't. Like no matter what I did, she was so scared. I don't think she ever learned anything from me because I would try to, tell her where to put her hands, and she would just like it was too much. And then I had one student his name was Julius Pfefferkorn, and he was a military man, and he had been in a conflict overseas and blown up one of his hands. he had blown up his left hand, I think. So it was in all kinds of gnarly shape. And so he couldn't make chords with it. So we flipped it around the guitar so he could make chords with the other hand and try to play with the hand that was injured. And then I had one kid who I loved this kid. He was like 11 years old, and his favorite thing in the whole world was the music of Chris de Burgh. You remember Chris de Burgh? He didn't like that Lady in Red stuff. He wanted to learn how to play like "Don't Pay the Ferryman." He wanted all the like Chris de Burgh deep cuts. This was an 11-year-old child in like 2000, the year 2000. Complete weirdo. I loved him so much because I was like, oh, I understand you completely, young man. Nobody around you knows what the hell you're talking about. You love Chris de Burgh. So I would go back and I would chart out all these Chris de Burgh songs, and it made me so happy. Just yeah, I liked it. I liked teaching. I didn't get to do it for very long because I had to give it up when I went on tour.
Let's talk about songwriting because we've talked about learning to play your instrument. How early into playing guitar a lot did you start to come up with your own melodies and songs and then focus on that as well?
When I was probably 10 or 11, I started writing lyrics to like blues patterns, old blues songs and stuff. And I was also writing some poems and short stories and things like that because I read a lot. I enjoyed reading. My mom would, read to me and give me books from the time I was really little. So I started writing lyrics at 11, 12, 13 years old, but I didn't let anybody hear them until, much later, 7 or 8 years later, just because nobody wanted to hear them, and they weren't very good. It was just for me at first, which it kind of still is, I guess. But now people want to hear them.
Do you think there's any essential quality in even those earliest lyrics and songs that would remind us of you if somehow magically we could hear it now that would have a Jason Isbell quality to it?
I hope so. Yeah, probably so. I mean, I was trying to be witty, and there might have been a good detail. Every 3 or 4 songs, I might have found my way to one good detail. Yeah, I would hope that you would recognize that. But I mean, my parents shocked my parents, because you're not used to a 10 or 11-year-old writing songs, and I remember singing one for them in the car one time. I was like, "Hey, you guys want to hear this song I made up?" And I sang it in the car. And I remember them doing the thing where they would look at each other like thinking that I couldn't see them, because my parents were super young. Like when I was 10, my dad wasn't 30 yet. My mom was 27, dad was 29. So they were both kind of looking at each other like, what the hell do we do with this thing? They did that a lot. And I noticed, there was a lot of like, I don't know, is this good or is this bad? What's going on here? But they were always really impressed, and everybody around me encouraged me because they could tell that I loved making music and that I had an aptitude for it. And, so they did what they could to accommodate that.
Yeah, and so you mentioned these couple of kind of trademark elements, the witty, something witty, and something that's a strong detail as being a couple of the elements that you recognize are part of how you do what you do. When did you start to notice those things, what your style was, and how early did a style begin to develop?
I don't know. That's not really something I've ever thought much about. I mean, I think the first songs that I played for people when I was probably 19, those probably had those elements already. The idea of like find a particular detail and then make it mean something, or create a character and follow them around. Those were things that I was doing early on. But that was in a lot of ways because that's what I was drawn to. That's what I liked. I like to be reading a book and then have to sit it down for a second and think about what you just read. And I like that with a song too, where you have to pause it and go, wait a minute, what did he just say? It sounds simple and then it turns out to not be. So that was something I was trying to do from the beginning, especially from the late teens. But I was a weird kid. I mean, I looked very normal, and I came from Alabama, and I just happened to have these interests that a lot of people around me didn't really have. And, there was, when I was in Memphis in college, there was one time when they had a open mic, like poetry reading downtown at this coffee shop bar. That was the same place that I wound up playing songs for people for the first time, my own songs, called the Map Room. It was downtown. It's a shoe store now. I stumbled across it a couple years ago on tour and bought some shoes in there. But the ceiling is still the same. They still have the maps on the ceiling, so that's pretty good. But I went in there with my little notebook, and I got up for some, I don't know why I wanted to do this. I think I thought that I was pretty good at it and wanted confirmation on that. So I got up, all these hipsters, man, and they were all writing about Jeff Buckley and stuff, because he had just recently drowned there in Memphis. And I got up and read one of my poems, and I got about halfway through it, and the lady that owned the place stopped me. She came out of the kitchen. I'll never forget. She came out of the kitchen and she stopped me right in the middle, which is terribly rude, They hadn't done that to anybody else. But she said, "We're all reading poems that we wrote, not just poems that we like." And I said, "Have you heard this somewhere before?" And she said, "No." And I said, "I wrote this yesterday. But if I'm ripping somebody off, I wish you'd let me know, because I don't think that I am." And then she was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead," because I didn't look like that. I had like khaki pants and, sneakers, and my shirt was tucked in, and my hair was short, and all these kids they looked like they've been jumping trains, uh, with a begging for money to feed their dog. They did not look like me, and my accent, all these things have always sort of collaborated to make me a strange person, which I really like. I'm very grateful for it now.
So, kind of noticing that that kind of detailed lyric was an important thing for you, or that could be the roots of the song tree consistently, as you like, if you could find that, a song could kind of grow around it. It sounds like is one of the things you're talking about, because it makes me wonder, like, does some of the things that end up being that important lyric to you in any given song, do they emerge first? Does the sort of uncanny lyric pop in on its own, and then it has to find its way to a song?
It's different, however I can get it. I mean, sometimes I have an idea for a chorus, and sometimes I have just one little detail, one little moment. Sometimes I have a person, and I need to go about the process of fleshing them out, so to speak, and then seeing what they want to do. It's different all the time. Early on, it was like I had a story I wanted to tell somebody, so I would go from there. But I figured out that it happens more naturally, and that you don't have to look for all that stuff to find it. You can just lay out sort of the structure of the song and try to say one right thing, one true thing after another, and you'll find your way to all that. But that took me a lot of years to figure out, because I was trying to force, that let's make sure everybody knows that this is what's happening, or this is what I'm talking about. And later on, I figured out that you don't have to do that. The song will do that for itself.
Do your lyrics tend to undergo a lot of layers of refinement and kind of revision and everything?
More, I don't know about a lot. I mean, 2 or 3 passes usually. Not like a Leonard Cohen lot, but not like a Lady Gaga little. Somewhere between those two.
Yeah, because I know one of the things musically, in terms of the musical execution of your songs, you like to capture first takes and these more innocent moments of creation when it comes to the music itself. And then with both singing and the lyrics, obviously it's just not possible to always rip a take and be like, those words were perfect. I'm willing to commit that to be on the fucking album, but then
Yeah.
you lose some of that spark of creativity that I know is important to you. So yeah, I'm just intrigued to hear a bit more about, at this point where you are now, how that works for you, and kind of, what's your idea of what your best takes are?
Yeah, I would never go in to make an album without having done my homework first, unless that was the job that I was trying to do. I have an idea where at some point I'd like to go into the studio with nothing and make an album in a day and play all the instruments myself and write all the songs there in the studio just to see if I could do it. But on a normal record, I've got the songs with me when I come in there. I've spent months beforehand, poring over the words and the melodies and the arrangements, and because that way they don't get corrupted. You don't get in there and start arguing about words and melodies and stuff. I write the songs, so I'm going to do that first, and then when I get in there, it can be more collaborative because the songs are already written. But there's a big difference in the, creating on the spot that you do when you're performing live or when you're trying to get the right take in the studio, and building the platform that you're going to use to create from, and the song is the platform for that. And really also, the secret is the song is the only thing anybody cares about, unless you're trying to make a hit. If you're trying to make a hit, then you got to produce everything a very specific way, and everything has to sound in, a certain way. But if you're trying to just make something good, you can make it on a terrible, shitty 4-track with one microphone, and if the songs are good, it's going to work. And if the songs aren't good, nobody's going to care. So that part you have to spend a lot of time on and really get it right. And then if you've done that, then when you go in the studio, you're prepared. It's not like you're giving a speech and you haven't written a speech yet. It's like you're going in the studio to play with the machines, and that can be really super fun. But if you don't have the songs, man, that's a stressful thing to go in and start recording and say, oh, well, I've got, one verse and a chorus for this, and I got another verse and a chorus for that song, and we got to piece all this together. You're going to spend a lot of time sitting in a vocal booth on the floor with a pencil while everybody else eats lunch,
No salad for you.
No, you got to work.
No
You got to work.
No Pop-Tarts for you.
No Pop-Tarts.
Are you always writing?
I'm always taking notes. About a year before I make a record, I'll get fairly serious about it. And then for the 3 months leading up to the recording, I'll sit down almost every day and, with the intention of writing. But, I'm always writing things down. And, writing and just sitting around and playing the guitar are very different things. But sometimes there's this moment where they converge. I'll sit and play for an hour or two, then I'll do something that I think is cool. Then I'll do it again, and I'll do it again, and if it doesn't stop being cool, then I'll record it, and go from there. But yeah, that can happen on the road or at home, or at this point, I'm not precious about it. I don't need inspiration or any of that nonsense. I just need time.
By the time you get to where you're finishing the songs before you're taking them into the studio, is there a point where you know what the album's going to be about? Sort of before the songs are actually out of you, relatively early in the process, where you have this sense of, okay, it's been a couple of years. I think I know what I need to get off my chest. And now I've got to actually just find the words for all of it.
No, I don't do that. I think that's dangerous, because that's a restriction that you don't need. Then you start writing for a purpose that's something other than, I just need to get this out. And also, those kind of decisions aren't for me. Those are for other people. The themes of the record, they'll make themselves known, or somebody else will figure them out later on. While I'm writing it, I try very hard not to judge it, whether that's judge it as good or bad, or find common threads between the songs. Those aren't on my list of rules. My list of rules are all very conducive to continuing the process of creating the songs, but I don't go back and take songs from 10 or 12 years ago that I didn't use for anything and spruce them up a little bit and put them on a new record. I don't work that way. All the songs for Weathervanes were written for Weathervanes, and same with Reunions and all the records that I've done before that. Just because, once you do that, then the themes are going to line up, because you're in the same place while you're writing these songs, and the same things are on your mind. And you just have to be careful not to write 4 songs about the same thing. If you get too far into that, then you're like, well, okay, I think I've talked about that enough.
Yeah, and there's the sort of you, the essential you of it all. It's I don't know, it's always going to have the you in it. I suppose you must at a certain point come to that where you're just like, oh yeah, it's going to sound like me because I am me.
Yes, yes. And if you're open, if you have confidence in your own voice and you're emotionally open enough to not cut yourself off mid thought, then all that other stuff will take care of itself. The real work, the hard work comes down to finding the right words, that sing the right way and rhyme and fit into those spaces, almost like working a crossword puzzle. I try to accept going into it that the right word is out there somewhere. I just have to find it. It doesn't even have to be in English. It's just you have so much at your disposal. Sonically, you only have a few notes, but lyrically, the combinations are damn near infinite.
Well, I think that's a perfect place for us to wrap up, Jason.
Infinity.
Infinity is a good conclusion.
Thank you. I like talking to you, Jenny. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to Jason for that awesome interview. He and the 400 unit are on tour in the U.S. in early 2024. You can get tickets at jasonisbell.com. And thanks so much for listening to episode 97. I've got another one out in a few weeks with Joya Latticoon. That was a super fun conversation as well. And you can reach me online at JennyLSQ and find earlier episodes of the LSQ podcast at jennylsq.com.